Please be seated. Your Excellency, Dr. Mohamed Irfaan Ali, President of the Co-operative Republic of Guyana, Minister within the Office of the Prime Minister, the Honorable Kwame McCoy, Mr. Kit Nascimento, Consultant, and Mrs. Marcia Sharma, Director of Projects, members of the media, colleagues, good morning, and welcome to the President's press conference. This press conference is being broadcasted live on several platforms, including the Facebook pages of His Excellency Dr. Irfaan Ali, DPI, NCN, and the Office of the President. We are also streaming live on television, including NCN, MTV, RCA, NTN, TVG, and E-Networks. Welcome everyone. I am Sue Finlay Williams, Press Secretary to the President, and I'm pleased to be your moderator today. To get the proceedings underway, His Excellency will deliver a statement on the progress of the government's programs. After that, you will be allowed or given the opportunity to ask the President your questions. I will now like to invite His Excellency, Dr. Mohamed Irfaan Ali, to the podium to deliver his opening remarks, his statement to us on the government's programs.
Ladies and gentlemen of the press, it is my pleasure to welcome you all at this press conference and to speak to the nation. We have been in office for 9 months. We took office on the verge of a threatened dictatorship, chaotic mismanagement, and near economic collapse. We have been very busy repairing the damage and restoring our country to economic sanity and progress. We have continued with the APNU-AFC opposition, which refuses to accept the results of a democratic election, refuses to recognize the elected government, and refuses to sit down and work with that government for the progress of our country. I particularly welcome, therefore, the decision of Chief Justice Roxanne George in dismissing an election petition filed by that opposition, which spuriously sought to challenge the constitutional and legal results of the general and regional elections held on the 2nd of March last year, which elected the People's Progressive Party to government and which was recognized without exception internationally. The decision of the court is testimony both to the independence of our judiciary and the enduring strength of our democracy, and especially in the manner and efficiency in which the court conducted these hearings. Even more importantly, the decision arrived by the court is further evidence of the fact that as a people and a country, whatever our party political differences may be, these differences are settled peacefully and within the rule of law under which we are all constitutionally governed. So let me take this opportunity to recommit my administration to continuing to uphold and defend the separation of powers between the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary, which is so vital to the functioning of our democracy. I look forward to our course continuing to recognize the efficacy of the last elections in addressing any future challenges on this matter. Today, I address you in the midst of challenging times for us in Guyana and globally. Time does not permit me to address you on every and all aspects of my government's performance since taking office, and of course, you will have the opportunity to raise your questions. Let me begin by emphasizing the fact that the COVID-19 pandemic is far from an end. Several mutations of the virus constantly challenge the response. Science has concluded that vaccination is the only way out. My government has launched an exceptionally aggressive vaccination program to achieve herd immunity in the shortest possible time frame. It has not been easy. As you're aware, sourcing the vaccines is a global challenge, and we have met it head-on. We have made every resource available to get us all vaccinated. To date, our comprehensive response to COVID has cost us, as a nation, billions of dollars. While the government is taking every step to have everyone vaccinated, it is the responsibility of every citizen, though not mandatory, to understand the importance of vaccination. These vaccines come with a shelf life, costs for storage and transportation, which are enormous and will not forever be available. To get back to normalcy, the introduction of a mass vaccination passport is being contemplated by many countries. In fact, we have already seen countries lower entry requirements for vaccinated persons. We here in Guyana will soon have to consider this option. Regardless of whether you have been vaccinated or not, we must all follow the COVID-19 guidelines. We have hoped that common sense would have prevailed in following the established guidelines, and unfortunately, it hasn't. The enforcement, therefore, of these guidelines will be further strengthened and enhanced. It is a determination of my government to take health care and to take care of the health of all of our people. The health sector as a whole is undergoing transformative change. Works are ongoing under the Smart Hospital program at Lenora, Mabaruma, Letem, and Paramakutoy, while the Diamond Hospital has been reopened. Under the India Grant Program, the contract has been awarded for the design of the West Demerara, Bartika, and Saudi Hospitals Improvement Project. The maternity hospital in Letem is scheduled to be completed in May 2021, while the Festival City Health Center is scheduled to be completed in September. We have already earmarked the land for a state-of-the-art maternity and children hospital, and discussions are ongoing with different funding agencies for its construction. We are also receiving enormous interest for private investments in healthcare, of which strong local content and involvement is evident. To support this infrastructure, investment in human resources and strengthening of the system is of great priority. Work has commenced on the building of a national patient care management information system. Food security and building our agricultural sector to be the food provider regionally is our priority. The intention of government is to focus our investments in the sector to be globally competitive. We're already seeing results with positive growth in the rice sector through the development of 16 high-yielding rice varieties, increasing yields from 39 bags an acre to between 50 to 60 bags per acre in tested areas, and by the establishment of the Paddy Bog Action Unit in Region 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Our commitment to sugar has seen $7 billion allocated to Gaisuku. The corporation has completed a 5-year strategic plan, rehired more than 1,000 workers, and an expression of interest for private participation in the industry saw significant responses, which are currently under evaluation. The government is also supporting farmers with maintenance works in drainage and irrigation, or investment in other crops has returned substantial earnings. In building our livestock industry, government has invested and will continue to invest in high-quality livestock for improved production and productivity. The fishing and aquaculture industry has seen remarkable expansion with over $30 million in private investment for this year. Our natural resources sector continues to improve. ExxonMobil yesterday has, for instance, announced the discovery of the Yarrow-2 well in the Stabroek block, which will add to the gross discovered recoverable resource estimate, currently estimated to be approximately 9 billion oil equivalent barrels. The FPSO Unity is scheduled to arrive in the second half of this year, whilst Payara is expected to come online by 2024. By 2027, it is expected that 3 additional FPSOs will come on stream, taking production to 1 million barrels per day. The local private sector is becoming more involved and aggressive in proactively preparing for these opportunities with expansion and construction of new shore and air-based capacity and the building of our servicing capabilities. Our local content provisions will ensure that once the service is offered here competitively, it must be given priority to be utilized. Our forestry sector is regaining momentum, with projections estimated at 406,000 cubic meter, with an export value of US $38 million. The expanded low carbon development strategy is a platform through which our development pathway will be embedded. This was recently reinforced at a Commonwealth Heads of Government Americas Roundtable discussion. This was hosted by His Royal Highness Prince Charles. The roundtable discussed how to advance green recovery post-COVID and initiatives to be taken for consideration at the 26th UN Climate Change Conference of the parties, COP26, later this year. To advance our participation in the carbon market, we have signed a letter of intent with Emergent Finance Accelerated Inc., a US-based non-profit organization, to sell our carbon credit through credit contract. This agreement has the potential of earning us hundreds of millions of US dollars annually. Guyana has a huge quarry potential and that has been greatly underdeveloped. The extraordinary demand in the construction boom has required the importation of an estimated 40% of the demand in the last few months, at an approximate value of US $10 million. We can produce this locally. Our accelerated housing program, massive highways and community roads to be developed, will increase our demands threefold over the next 5 years. In order to maximize local benefit, thus creating jobs and expanding local content, we're in the process of issuing new quarrying licenses in order to fully satisfy local demand. To boost the mining sector, in addition to the budgetary allocation, GGMC will invest $2.7 billion to maintain approximately 1,500 kilometers of hinterland roads, repair 40 culverts, and build 20 log bridges. I've asked the Ministry of Public Works to complete a condition audit of all bridges along the Linden to Lethem Road. The ministry will further design and cost each bridge, which will be built in concrete to international standards. These costs will be included in government expenditure. In the housing and construction sector, we are well on our way to achieving our promised 50,000 house lots. We have already completed 4,000 within our first 9 months in office. Our investment portfolio of $15 billion in housing has seen a drop in low-income interest rates, an increase in the loan ceiling from 12 million to 15 million, and an increase in the mortgage relief threshold from 15 million to 30 million. With more than 676 commercial construction approvals, further opportunities for jobs and economic expansion will be created. The budgeted 39 billion for roads under public works, excluding the 4-lane highways along the East Bank and East Coast corridors, has created opportunities for more local participation, requiring, for example, 28,000 truckloads of sand and loam and 600,000 tons of quarrying materials. This, no doubt, will add to the realization of our 50,000 job promise. It is expected that by the end of this week, the 9 pre-qualified bidders for the new Demerara Harbor Bridge will be invited to tender. We expect the bridge to be completed and delivered within 24 months from the commencement of its construction. The Ministries of Public Works of Guyana and Suriname are currently in the process of procuring consultancy services for the feasibility and design of the Quarantine River Bridge. My government's commitment to our forest people is unreserved. We have recommenced the CSO program with more than 1,900 Amerindian youths attached to Amerindian villages. In order to boost food production, we have invested close to $1 billion in hinterland agriculture development. We have invested close to $2 billion in grants to village councils for income-generating projects. Our country's commitment to the protection of our sovereignty and territorial integrity is paramount. We have welcomed the judgment on jurisdiction given by the International Court of Justice, and we are diligently preparing to submit our case for the court by the 8th of March next year, as prescribed by the court. We are deeply appreciative of the virtually universal support received from the international community, especially from the countries of the CARICOM community and from the countries of the Organization of American States. We are horrified by the damage and the sufferings caused to our brothers and sisters of St. Vincent and the Grenadines from the volcanic explosions, and in collaboration with the private sector, we have sent 3 relief shipments. We continue to work with our CARICOM partners as the lead for agriculture in the region in advancing the initiatives for food production and security. Our Foreign Affairs Minister recently participated in a meeting with the U.S. Secretary of State and CARICOM, advocating for a new partnership addressing energy security. Our country is developing at a massive rate, and as I recently told the private sector, we have limited resources in managing both external and domestic threats to our country's security. We have recognized the fact that our law enforcement capacity is challenged by the sophisticated evolvement of criminal enterprise, and my government understands the responsibility of meeting the challenge to protect our people, their lives, and their property. We cannot do this alone. The private sector must be our partners. We look to their collaboration in providing support and oversight at every level. We are now, for example, establishing a management committee which involves the participation of civil society. Last year, we invested some $15 billion in the security sector. We have looked at the stats, and under the Ministry of Home Affairs, have designed and begun to implement a national plan to ensure that we both have the financial and human resources to comprehensively tackle crime. Very importantly, we have restored and we have strengthened our community policing groups, which number just under 4,000 members. We understand that rapid deployment is essential for rapid response, And where there was significant neglect, we will be shortly providing 50 new patrol vehicles to enhance the mobility of the police force. We also recognize that police stations across the country have been neglected for too long. And since we have come into office, construction of new police stations is nearing completion at Letham, Madhya, Fort Wellington, Anna Regina, and Diamond. We also recognize that for far too long, our prison facilities and services have been grossly neglected and are now being addressed, the details of which have already been made public by the Minister of Home Affairs with regards to the Mazruni, Luzaknan, and New Amsterdam prisons. I'm confident that our country is on the right path. The journey to prosperity has been accelerated and will only be realized with hard work, commitment, and a collective embrace of Guyana's future. I'm now pleased to take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. President, for your remarks. Before I invite questions, please allow me to set a few guidelines or to remind you, therefore I know you're already familiar with the rules of a presidential press conference. However, I would like to just remind you of the following. When you wish to ask a question, please indicate by raising your hand. When I recognize you, please stand, state your name and your organization, and then I will allow a follow-up question if you wish. I would encourage you to ask the President questions on his statement. However, the President will be more than happy and pleased to respond to all your questions. I'll now invite the first question. I saw you first, and then we'll take Samuel, and then we'll come to Julia.
Mikhail Rodriguez for the Daybreak News. President Ali, does your administration have any plans for an oil refinery in Guyana?
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Go ahead. Okay, Mr. President, thank you. We'll take Samuel's question, and then we'll come across to Julia, and then this young man over there.
Samuel Suknandan, NCN News. Mr. President, some Guyanese have been reluctant to take the COVID-19 vaccine. Does your government have any plans to achieve a greater vaccination rate?
Thank you, Samuel. I'll kindly pass the mic over to Julia. We'll take Julia's question.
Mr. President, good day to you, colleagues. My question and a follow-up. I'll follow up on Samuel's and then I'll ask a substantive question. Okay. On the COVID program, sir, are you satisfied that the public is getting the best information and education on this program, given the fact that you have said earlier that what you need is a mandatory understanding by all citizens of all that is COVID and why they need to be vaccinated? That's for the follow-up on Samuel's question. And I'll ask you my substantive question. Has Cabinet any position on the Guy oil issue? And when are we likely to get Cabinet's decisions that would have occurred on those after those weekly meetings? Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Mr. President, would you like to respond before we take other questions?
First of all, let me thank all of you very kindly for your questions. During the campaign, we have made it very clear that for us to realize the full potential and benefit from the oil and gas sector, we have to look at every and all opportunities that exist. A refinery has always been part of the discussion. But what we did on the campaign is made it very clear that whilst we support the building of a refinery to add value to our oil and gas sector, we do not support government investing in the refinery. So, yes, we support the development of the refinery. We have received proposal, private sector proposal for such refinery, and that, of course, is being looked at by government. The reluctance of Guyanese to take the COVID-19 vaccines. As Julia pointed out, there are many ways in which we are addressing this. First of all, there are a lot of misconceptions out there on the vaccines itself. We have engaged civil society. I think earlier this week, the other political parties were also engaged in an effort to build a national coalition. The private sector also was engaged, the religious community, so that we can have a national coalition encouraging and motivating persons to take the vaccines. But we must recognize that it is not mandatory. Now, given that fact, how do we move forward if there is still resistance? And that is why I've pointed in my presentation to what other countries are doing. The vaccination passport is becoming an essential document to conduct business now. It lowers requirement if you're traveling to some countries. Some countries are now even moving towards removing the mask policy if you have both vaccination. And some countries are even contemplating a two-tier system. Those who are vaccinated fully and go for public services, you go through the line. Those who are not vaccinated, you have to go through some testing before you get to that service. Some countries are contemplating that right now. We will have to contemplate all of these options at some point, because we cannot take the health, our collective health, put our collective health at risk by a few who do not understand the importance of all of us getting vaccinated to get out of this together. Having said that, I want to thank many members of civil society, even in this very group, the media group, who did an excellent job at demonstrating the fact that they took the vaccine, which helps. All of this helps. So that is what we're contemplating moving forward in ensuring that all Guyanese move towards the vaccination program. Julia, in terms of the public getting the best education and information, I believe that there's a lot of information out there. Whether the information leads to education of the public is a different story. And that has to do with how information is packaged and how information is related to the public itself. And I would definitely like to see improvement in the dissemination of information, one, for educational purposes, and two, for public consumption on what we're doing in relation to tackling COVID. So very frankly, that is my take on this. Cabinet position on the Guyana issue. Well, first of all, let me say that, make three things very clear. One is that no fraud was committed because no transaction was entered into. That's the first thing. No fraud was committed because no transaction was entered into. But what is of great importance to us is to have a review of the system to ensure that the system is rigid and strong enough at every tier to deal with any potential from a company or an individual wanting to commit a fraud. And that is what we're evaluating. We've also made it very clear that all those who had inappropriate contact must be removed. All those who had inappropriate contact must be removed. So that would be my take on this issue.
Thank you, Mr. President. Danash? Post-cabinet.
Oh, sorry.
Apologies.
Yes, Julia, I want to assure you, you know, the pandemic has really obstructed the normalcy in which everyone operates, the media, the government, the private sector. But I want to assure you that the matter of post-cabinet updates will be dealt with very shortly, and these updates will become frequent at the end of every cabinet.
Thank you, Mr. President. Danash, could you pass the mic to this young man over here, and then we'll take Gordon Mosley's question, after which we'll take Nazima.
Mr. President, Navendra Siraj, Guyana Chronicle. You mentioned government's intention to enhance and improve the COVID measures in place. Can you say what are some of those specific measures? And also, can you say if there's a direct relation between COVID-19 and the reported increase in the prices and for certain services and commodities? Yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
now.
Sir, we'll take Gordon's question, and then Nazima. Go ahead.
Gordon Mosley, News Source. Mr. President, we're meeting here in April, the month with the highest rate of infection of COVID-19, the month with the highest death rate. Could you say if the government is planning any toughening up of the COVID-19 regulations and guidelines? And sir, your government has now been in office for just over 8 months, dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. How would you grade your government's response to the pandemic so far? And on the question, an answer you gave just now, you said no fraud was committed because no transaction was committed. Yet you're asking that persons with inappropriate contact be removed. Are those persons you're referring to board members? Are they managers at Guy Oil? Who are those persons you're referring to?
Thank you, Gordon. Nazima, would you like to take Nazima's question? Go ahead, sir.
Okay, let me deal with these two questions. Now, and Gordon, I can deal with both the enforcement measures at the same time. Now, as I said earlier, we thought good sense would have prevailed, but it hasn't from the population in the way they treat the pandemic, the COVID-19, their behavior, their actions. Let me give you an example. Over the weekend, I received a call from the task force that the enforcement unit is on the highway, the Linden-Soestdijk Highway. And there are no less than 1,000 persons there. There are no less than 1,000 persons. If we take all 1,000 persons into a police station, we are creating another disaster. I just give this example to highlight to you the challenge we face and the requirement for Guyanese to understand that their lives matter. The lives of their family members matter. The lives of people in their community matter. And they cannot be this reckless. They cannot be this reckless. So, I've asked the Prime Minister to discuss at the task force how we now shift the focus on the owners of these facilities. and the managers of these facilities. So if the owners and managers allow these breaches at their facilities, then they'll be charged to the full extent of the law. We have to even contemplate, because we don't know how long is the efficacy of the vaccine that is still being tested globally. And we don't know if this is an annual shot that we'll need. So our response in terms of the guidelines and the protocols, that we know for sure, has some long-term bearing. If you look at the vaccination of countries within our region now, you will see that on an average, we're well below 7% when you take all the countries together. Now, it is not only the vaccination of us here that brings things to normalcy, because we have to interact with the rest of the world, with the rest of the region. We are part of a global and regional community. So, yes, you will see stronger enforcement, enhancement of that enforcement. We are now going to add more boots on the ground from the army and the police to support the enforcement. And we're going to put more resources into this. But the irresponsibility of some is costing us, because we now have to put resources, more resources on this aspect of the pandemic, when we could have used those resources either on the public education and information aspect or in mainstream healthcare. Now, in terms of the commodity, the increased prices for different services and commodities. Globally, and here in Guyana, we are faced with a severe challenge. The first thing is that production facilities across the world are still not operating at their fully optimized level. Some of them are still operating at less than 50%. Manufacturing facilities are still operating at less than 50%. So what has resulted? One, the cost of shipping has gone up enormously. 9 months ago, to ship a container out of China was about $2,500 US. Today, that container is close to $10,000 US. The prices for grains has gone up tremendously globally. And once the prices for grains go up, it affects the cost of feed, feed production, poultry, meat. So these are the challenges you're facing globally. These are factors we have no control of. That is when we talk about imported inflation. These are imported costs we have to take care of that we have no control of. So what we have done by adjusting on the tax side, adjusting on the VAT side, is our local response to cushion and minimize the effect of what is happening globally. We now have challenge in terms of food production globally. Shortages in food production. That's a major debate that is going on. And what is taking place now in large production area like India and Brazil. You know, Brazil is a major supplier of food globally. And India and Brazil, they're having the greatest impact. COVID is having the greatest impact there now. So of course, we will see added pressure on commodities price and the price for services. But I want to also say that whilst we work in partnership with the private sector also has a responsibility, a social responsibility, to adjust margins, to help the consumer. And we are hoping that the private sector would help also, and not only the government policy and measures in addressing this global issue. And to answer your question directly, Gordon, there was an evaluation, there was a performance evaluation conducted, and the CEO was asked to go on leave because of performance-related matter. He subsequently resigned because of that. He stays resigned. The board member, Blair, and I've asked that the board member Blair be removed, and the staff, I think Sean Prasad, I think. That staff will be removed because he was on probation. In addition to this, there is an ongoing investigation with Guy Oil. There's an ongoing investigation with Guy Oil where $300 million in fuel is being investigated with the Army, where they had great mismanagement. The Auditor General had raised that. The investigation, we have an investigation ongoing also with companies collecting fuel from the terminal, and those companies had no right to be there collecting fuel in other agency name, and these are things we inherited, and those investigations are going on. Those investigations are with the police and the Auditor General at the moment. So I can't comment more on that. But those are things we inherited. Massive, massive corruption we inherited there. Let me make it very clear. Massive corruption at Guy Oil. And it is being investigated. It is with the police and the Auditor General now. All right?
Thank you.
The what? I'm not in the business of self-grading mostly, but I can tell you from a lot of international and regional leaders, they've graded us very well.
Thank you.
One, in managing the pandemic, given what we inherited when we came into office, given the institutions that we inherited when we came into office. That's one. Two, creating the balance in the economy in our country in managing COVID. And three, just look at what were the predictions of PAHO. Look at what were the predictions of PAHO for Guyana. And then you grade us. Then you do an honest assessment and grade us. That is the benchmark. PAHO had predictions for Guyana. I think was close to 5,000 deaths. You compare where we are with PAHO, and then you grade us, my good friend.
Thank you, Mr. President. I believe Nazima has a question, after which we will take Dennis' question.
Mr. President, I know you said a lot about the COVID fight. At this time, would the government take serious consideration when it comes to amending the laws? The laws seem inadequate where fines are concerned. And sir, any consideration to reviewing the curfew as it is? Also, Mr. President, are you satisfied with the plans for the CARICOM-wide response to the pandemic? It seems like every country is going alone on this journey. I know at some point in time you and several other heads had discussed tackling this as a group. And sir, can you say where your support at the end of this month stand for any one of the possible candidates for the position of Secretary General? Mr. President, can Mr. Nigel Hoppy get your nod as Commissioner of Police? I know our Police Commissioner, Mr. James, is preparing to head off very soon. And my last question.
Thank you, Nazima.
Mr. President, free up the weed is something that both parties have been campaigning on.
Thank you.
Free up the weed.
Yes,
marijuana.
yes.
Sir, I know your government had tabled or had a position that it was going to table the bill. It seems like policing efforts are spent on tackling this particular issue when it could be spent on otherwise. How can we put you to a timeline on passing or assenting to that particular legislation?
Thank you, Nazima. Mr. President, I'll respond to Nazima's question, and then we'll take questions, and then we'll take the others.
Nazima, you're perfectly correct. The fines are inadequate. And I have asked the AG, indeed, to relook at the laws to see how we can have amendment that can speak to the seriousness of what we're dealing with. So that is ongoing. The curfew, based on all the advice I've received, and the task force would have debated and deliberated, there is no need for the adjustment of the curfew. We have made this very clear. And you have all pointed to the fact that you can have the best, you can lock this country down forever, every day, every night. But if people don't adhere to the guidelines and protocols, we're not doing anything. So the issue is enforcement, the issue is adherence, and public information and education. CARICOM-wide response. I think CARICOM should be commended. We took the lead from the very inception to fight for the evenness or the equity in the distribution of the vaccine, because we knew that would have posed the greatest difficulty. And CARICOM even called for a global alliance, a global discussion. We wrote the United Nations. We wrote our development partners, not on behalf of CARICOM alone, on behalf of all developing countries, small island states. CARICOM did an exceptional job at raising awareness, lobbying in relation to the disproportionate way in which small countries were treated and developing countries, well, not were treated, are still being treated in relation to access to the vaccine. Yes, you're correct. We are louder when we are together. And we are working on a common approach to vaccination, a common approach in sharing information, in developing policies. But whilst we're doing that, every country within the community are faced with different difficulties or a different challenge. And we have to be mindful of that whilst we pursue a collective response. The SG, the Secretary General of CARICOM, that is still under review at the moment by Guyana and by the community. And as soon as we have finalized our position, the media will be the first to know. In relation to Commissioner Acting Nigel Hoppy, at this moment, At this moment, he is the commissioner acting, and I really have no further comment on that at this time.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before we take Dennis's question, is there anyone on this side of the room? So Kaiser News, all right. Kaiser News, Starbuck News, Guyana Times. All right, and then we move from there. I'll come back. Dennis, please present your question.
Which one?
Sorry?
Oh, yes, marijuana. What you call it, free up the weed? Well, I think this matter is still in the Parliament. You know, we have made a proposal in Parliament. So as soon as it gets out of the Parliament and it comes to me, then I'll be called into action.
Thank you. Dennis?
Yes.
Mr. President, Dennis Chabrol, Demerara News Talk Radio. Sir, could you say, first of all, what plans are there to use the oil revenues that Guyana has earned so far?
I didn't hear Chabrol, sorry.
I'm asking, sir, first of all, what plans are there to use the oil revenues that Guyana has accumulated so far, and what will be the priority projects? And now that the High Court has ruled against the election petitions, to what extent will this pave the way for any high-level discussions between the government and the opposition, not necessarily yourself, but high-level representatives? And thirdly, sir, could you say a bit more about the carbon credit accord that is being considered, and what is next is left to be done, and how will it work for the benefit of the ordinary man? Could you break it down for us? How will it work, and what next is left to be done?
Thank you, Dennis.
And quickly, sir, the status of the Norway low-carbon negotiations.
Thank you. Sir, would you like to respond to those?
Yes,
would you like to take one
definitely.
more?
Before I respond, I don't know if I can be afforded the opportunity of getting back my phone. Thank you. Let me say this: the oil revenue. Chabrol, you're so correct. We have made it very clear that the oil revenue must be linked to something broader. The oil revenue must be used to, one, strengthen existing opportunities in our country, and two, to open up new opportunities. New opportunities for investment, new opportunities for economic growth, new opportunities for social development. But in creating those opportunities, we have to ensure that there is equity. There is equity, and that there is no widening. There is no widening between those who have and those who don't have of that gap. The resources has to be used to close that gap. To close that gap. So healthcare, education, food security, healthcare, education, food security, housing, these are all areas that are critical in closing that gap. Whilst we open up new opportunities for ownership of lands, for farming, agriculture, realizing our potential to become the prime supplier of food regionally. We have to look at how we make investment to create an energy mix that would not only satisfy our local demand, but that will be part of the energy corridor that is currently being discussed along the Guyana Shield. Then we have to also look as to how we're going to use the resources to open up new opportunities in manufacturing, industrial development, so as to bring down the cost of energy, so as to lower the cost of production, so as to lower the cost of finished goods, so that we can be globally competitive. That is one aspect. Then, of course, we have our national infrastructure. We cannot continue losing thousands of man-hours every day in the traffic. we have to understand that our country is growing, that the need for infrastructure is expanding. So these are areas that we have to target. If you look at some of the journalists right here, you lose maybe 3 hours in a day in traffic if you're coming from the West Coast. We cannot increase productivity in this environment. So investment in infrastructure also becomes very critical. The carbon credit. So how this works is that, first of all, this is a US-based NGO that will be looking at markets for us, carbon credit markets. There is a base price, and then if the company achieves anything beyond that base price, it also comes to the country. So the base price is $10 per unit. But let us say the company got $13 on the open market. Then we get the 10 plus the 3 less the expense to get the market. So basically that is how it operates. Now if you use the base price as the basis on which you project revenue, we're talking about hundreds of millions of US dollars annually. Hundreds of millions of US dollars annually. In relation to the Norway agreement, you know we had some resources that were left there, that was left there from the last agreement. That is being programmed now in renewable energy, and also discussions on a new agreement are well underway. But we have not gone out of the discussion stages yet. But they are fairly advanced. I think those were your questions. Oh yeah, that is why I wanted my phone. Just bear with me for one moment.
We will appeal this every level until justice is delivered to us. We must keep hope alive. We must continue to fight. We will continue to work to remove this installed PPP regime. Through it all, you have been resilient, and I salute you. We must continue to be resilient and stand firm against injustice. We fight against principalities and powers, but our struggle is just and righteous, and the struggle must continue. Today is a dark and ominous day for democracy in Guyana. The ruling of the court must strike fear in the heart of all democracy-loving people in Guyana, in the Caribbean, and around the world.
I will stop it there because it takes us nowhere. How do you respond to that? That is the APNO AFC response to the court ruling. I just played for you. Does that give you any indication that they have any interest in working for the development of this country? Now attacking the court. We're driving fear in people. I think that answers the question.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yeah, well, as I explained to you, we have just entered into this with this letter of intent with the company, so they are now going to go and look for the markets and so on. So that is ongoing. And secondly, what was the second one? Okay, I outlined to you the template in which we will utilize the revenue. But of course, as you're aware, we have a number of things that we have to do in terms of setting up the Petroleum Commission. We have to also look at the legislation for the Sovereign Wealth Fund. Those are things that we have to do, but at this moment, we are not looking at the oil revenue to meet government expenditure at this moment. Later this year, when the macro development plan will be laid out in terms of the type of development that will take place, then that discussion will take place.
Thank you, Mr. President. The next three questions will come from Kaichur News, Starbuck News, and Guyana Times. Are you from Village? All right, so in a minute.
Good morning, Mr. President. Kiana Wilbur, Kaichur News. Just three areas I'd like to question you on. The first being the local content policy. When you had addressed members or stakeholders at the Artichon Convention Center, you had said that the policy should address more than just the oil sector. With what you've seen with the draft, is it in keeping with your vision? And secondly, to your question, to the statement you made in your opening remarks about the need for local businesses, once they are competitive, to be chosen by oil companies for products and services. One of the complaints that we've been getting in the media is that it's quite difficult for local companies who are now trying to break into the oil sector to actually be competitive against international companies that are also bidding for some of these contracts. How does your government intend to ensure that the policy creates the environment so that locals are not ostracized or stymied in their efforts to compete in the sector? I'd like to turn my attention to renewables. Do you foresee the development of oil delaying your government's timeline in joining the rest of the world with transitioning to renewables? And what's the timeline that you have in mind now that your government has made it clear you're moving ahead with the gas-to-energy project?
Thank you.
Finally, EITI.
Three
Final
questions.
question. Yes, final area. On the aspect of EITI, we're expected to have mineral contracts released. Yet this is something that continues to be one of the complaints in the reports, the two reports that we have thus far. How soon do you expect the state of affairs to change under your government where mineral contracts will no longer be kept a secret?
Thank you, my dear. I'll then start with and their question.
Marcel Thomas from the Starbuck News. Mr. President, you made mention in your opening remarks of the promises you'd made during campaign of the 50,000 jobs. My question is, can you say to date, if you know how many of those jobs have been created? And could you tell us how the public would be able to track these numbers? Is there some kind of database? How are you tracking it also? That's one. Two, the judiciary. It's still without a confirmed chancellor and chief justice. What do you intend to do, sir? And three, it may sound a bit monotonous, but after 9 months in office, the issue of the production sharing agreement, negotiations with Exxon still comes up for debate and discussion in public. What is government's position on that? Are you looking to negotiate it, or have you ruled it out altogether?
Thank you, Marcel. Mr. President, would you kindly respond to the first two questions, and then we will take the remainder.
Local content policy. Let me make it very, very clear to all out there. As long as we have the capacity locally, and we are investing in that capacity. We're investing through training, through certification, and the government will support the training and certification of persons. Companies in the private sector are transitioning to the standards required. And once we meet those standards and we are competitive in our pricing, those jobs must come here in Guyana. There is no negotiations around this, and there should be no second guessing this. But the important thing is, how do we get to that competitiveness? And I made this point before. We have to understand, first of all, the environment we're operating in. Our competitors are very sophisticated companies. They're shrewd. They're in the business a long time. They know the corners. Here in Guyana, we have a history of family-owned businesses. We don't have a history of consortium type of activity. And this is what I've explained to the private sector. We are not fighting each other locally. And we are too small individually most times. So how do we come together in order to compete? How do we build consortiums? How do we build partnership? We can't be satisfied, and I see this, and we're looking at this. We can't be satisfied being an associate of a company coming from overseas and be happy because you're getting a little piece, your company individually getting a little benefit. That is not true local content. How are we going after the big opportunities? And we are going to give all the support, shore and air bases, logistics. You cannot tell me that a company from out of Guyana will come here and provide brokerage service in Guyana. What nonsense. That will not be tolerated. It cannot be accepted. But what needs to happen? You see, logistics require a company to be flexible and nimble, to provide varied services. So if you're providing the service to the company, you have to have a health arm, a brokerage arm, a transportation arm, and that is what we have to develop. And that is the type of capacity we have to build in order to get that competitiveness. There has to be a frank discourse. And I've made this clear at the convention center. The oil companies must make it very clear what are the requirements for every service that is required. We must have an assessment as to where we are in meeting those requirements. And then together, as government and people, we build a system to fill the gap so we meet that requirement at the shortest possible time. And if the oil companies themselves are keen on the development of the country that is supporting their investment and giving them a return on the investment, then they must also be keen on providing opportunities for that country. Now, this is not to say, because we must be real, there are things that we don't have the capacity to do. This is not to say we are closing out external investment. We welcome external investment. But we also want to see some of those investments in the transformative aspect of our country. And that is why we have been paying so much attention on addressing other potential in our country. Ecotourism, energy, tremendous opportunity, food production. For a matter of fact, we have recently built a consortium among local poultry producers to move towards corn and soya production, to meet our local feed input requirement, so that we create that backward linkage that generates job, save foreign currency, and open up opportunities. And that is the type of development shift and focus that we are creating. So that is what I want to say on competitiveness. Transition to renewable. If what? Yes, well, the policy that will move forward will definitely be keeping with that vision, right? That I spoke of at the convention center and I continue to speak of. And as you rightfully said, our national local content agenda must not only be about oil and gas. It must be about building capacity in other areas of development. Now, transitioning to renewable. We had some initial discussion on time frame, and I would not want to give further elaboration on a time frame until we have fully prepared for COP26. Because discussions are still, internal discussions are still taking place on that. But let me say this about renewable energy. We have to look at renewable energy not only in the context of Guyana. Later this year, we're expecting to have a meeting between Brazil, Guyana, and Suriname to look at the energy corridor. Because, as you're aware, Suriname also have a lot of development that is taking place in the oil and gas sector. And we have to look at what the net output would be and what it means in supplying northern Brazil and in supplying French Guyana. So our energy mix would be broad and comprehensive beyond our shores. Our energy mix also must take into consideration the development path that our country is taking. And that is manufacturing, industrial development. That is the provision of more services, hotels, the need for more power, and secondly, the cost of that power. Because our plan is to bring down the cost of power by by at least 50% before the end of this 5-year. And I'm happy that you raised the question too of the gas to shore project, because sometimes we have a misconception. The gas that is coming is only one aspect. That is for the gas plant, the energy plant, natural gas energy plant. It is affiliated gas that is coming from a well. It is not a gas well that is being developed. Of course, we know that potential is out there that has to be evaluated, and that speaks to the development, massive development opportunity in expanding other areas. So I just want to make that difference very clear as to what gas we're talking about now. It's not a gas, field gas. It's affiliated gas that is coming on stream. Now, local content. Yes, the EITI. You would know, and if we are to have a fair assessment, you would know that we have been very open since we came into government. We have been sharing documents, we've been sharing contracts, we've been answering questions. I think, only 2 days ago, I know the Vice President would have met with editors and media owners to discuss the very issue of gas to shore. And we have no issues in sharing information. And that is a commitment that we made in our manifesto. That is a commitment we made to be open. So this is something I will look at that you would have raised, and definitely we will get back to you. In relation to the judiciary, the jobs, let me say this. If you look at the housing sector alone, and last night I asked for us to do the count on housing. We have close to 4,000 persons, new jobs being created in the housing sector alone. In the partnership between the ministry and the private sector alone, we have 1,000 homes being constructed. I give the example of the 28,000 loads of loam and sand that will be needed for the Public Works Ministry. Hundreds of jobs, drivers, operators, laborers, mechanics. That is how the economy works. These investments create a string of opportunities for different layers in our society. That is why these expenditures are so critical in not only opening up opportunities, but creating immediate benefits. Then I spoke about the 1,900 CSOs that are already in communities. We're talking about 5 new hotels coming on stream. We're talking about new quarries coming on stream. Each one of those quarries will employ more than 100 persons. How do you track it? How do you check it? When those hotels are completed? When not completed, during construction, we can visit the sites. We can visit the sites that these homes are being constructed. You can look at a straight line analysis. Look at what is happening on the road. We had shortages, we have shortages in steel, in loom, in cement, in stone. What does this tell us? There has been no drop in production capacity. For a matter of fact, there's been an increase in production and importation, but we still have shortages. What does this tell us? And we just have to go out there in the communities and you would see the results for yourselves. Then look at what we're doing in aquaculture. Innovative, simple, very simple, but innovative things. The swamp shrimp, as we know it from Barbados, well, the red shrimp. Julia, you know the shrimp? The red shrimp from Barbados that you put in the bhaji. Where are you from? Northwest. Well, you got good crab. We got to talk about the crab production and ginger. But let us, the swamp shrimp from Barbados has a natural market in the diaspora that we can't supply. We couldn't even supply 25% of the market. So what we have done is that we have set aside resources, I think close to $380 million, close to $400 million, to develop that industry that would increase production by almost 300%, to enter into that new market, to help the farmers in Pomeroon We're investing in long boom excavators with pontoons to secure them from flooding and to open up opportunities. The coconut industry is a major industry. So all of these things and investment are linked to job creation, linked to the opening up of new opportunities. The judiciary, yeah.
Just following up on that same question, I wanted to know if you had an idea or an average of how many jobs have been created, and if there is like a formal data collection system that will be able to monitor over time, so you'll know.
Definitely, because it's important for me too. And that system is being put in place. That is why I can tell you about housing. I can tell you about all the government expenditure, public expenditure, and the jobs that are linked to those expenditure. But the private sector, only last night we were talking, the private sector now has to also add their input into that, because a lot has been going on in the private sector, expansion of shore bases and so on. All right? Now, the judiciary. You know there is a process to do this. That process has not been activated, but you know, it was very interesting. You know, I have the greatest respect for the members of our judiciary and the independence of judiciary. I spoke about that, and definitely this is a matter that is engaging my attention at the highest priority level. And you know, let me not say this because, you know, look at Mr. Harmon's duplicity. I finish with what I had to say on that.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to allow questions from the
Oh,
following.
no, I am not finished with you. I know I'm not finished with you. The
Pardon
production
me.
sharing agreement. Yes. You know that in Payara, we had a commitment that whatever we do, we'll make public. Those negotiations were done, the agreement, and the agreement was made public immediately. In relation to the strengthening of the old agreement, we have committed to ensuring that we maximize the benefits, that we ensure that wherever there are areas that we can potentially relook at to maximize our benefits, those areas will be relooked at. There was no commitment, as you know, to renegotiate in the manifesto, right? We said that we're going to relook at this to see the gray areas that we can maximize our benefits. But the future agreements, I've made it clear that the future agreement, every aspect of the development of those agreements will be shared, and the public will be kept informed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll allow questions from
I
a
think
representative.
someone from Guyana
Yes,
Times.
Guyana Times. After Guyana Times, Nightly News, and then we'll take a representative from Village Voice.
Good afternoon, sir. Banu Manikchan, the Guyana Times. In light of what you said earlier about addressing future challenges, where is government with the much-needed electoral and constitutional reforms? Sir, several Guyanese in St. Vincent and the Grenadines have indicated they want to return. Can you say what is being done on government's end to facilitate this? And are you satisfied with the progress that has been made on the gas-to-shore pipeline and the financing arrangements? Also, what are your views on Exxon co-owning the projects? Sorry. And when will Guyana resume the sale of oil blocks?
Sale of what?
Oil blocks.
I think I will not spend much time on the gas to shore project. We have spent a lot of time this week on on gas to shore. I don't know if you attended, but I'm sure you had representation there. So you just refer to your notes on gas to shore. Electoral and constitutional reform, this is indeed critical. But you're aware that for constitutional reform, there is a process. That process commenced, and I've asked the AG to move aggressively on this so that a public consultation can commence on constitutional reform. Constitutional reform must come from the people, and as soon as that process commences, it will take us down the journey of constitutional reform. Electoral reform, I know there's a lot of work that is ongoing now. A lot of international agencies that are in discussion both with GCOM and different stakeholders, and also, but more importantly, we as a people, we have to start the discussion on electoral reform, but that is high on the agenda. Also important on that agenda is the strengthening of GCOM and the internal reform of GCOM itself, so that we can have the best professionals in there managing and running an elections. The oil blocks, we have made it very clear. The process in awarding new oil blocks will be very, very much different. It will be an open public process, and when we get to that stage, it will be a public open bidding process. There will be no, we'll be looking for the best offer in an open public way. Unless, of course, and we are still looking at, discussions are still ongoing. It calls for a lot of technical analysis on whether Guyana itself would retain some of those blocks for our own development and to manage by ourselves. But that is very preliminary. But in terms of granting of any new blocks, that has to be an open public process.
Thank you, Mr. President. Vanu, I really
No,
like
I think I missed a question for you.
Yeah, I just
Okay.
wanted your views on Exxon co-owning the pipelines.
No, that's why I said our views are very clear on this. We discuss, it would be no different from what you heard 2 days ago. That was why I asked you to refer to your notes. Let's go on to the next question.
Thank you. Nightly News and representative from Village Voice.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. President. First of all, you said that you have decided to inject finances as well as other resources into the police force. Do you think that this is adequate to deal with the situation at the police force, given the numerous allegations of corruption over the years? Secondly, you mentioned that $1 billion has been set aside for indigenous agricultural projects. Could you see whether the government will be ensuring access to markets for those communities? And will your government be committing to a commission of inquiry into the assassination of former Minister of Agriculture, Saturday Osong, at least before you demit office? My questions. Thank you.
That's a long time, demitting office after elections. Another 5 years, hopefully. Very long time. Let me say this, though. You have to understand indigenous communities. And you have to understand the first task. And the first task is to ensure the communities themselves are food secure. When you go to these communities, you will hear from time to time the major complaint is the cost of transportation and the cost of getting food into the community. So the first investment is to make these communities and regions food secure themselves. So that's the first plank of the plan. And then we have the mining communities, forestry operations that are in close proximity to many of those communities. So once we make them food secure in the first instance, and then increase production, we are really moving to a natural market. And that is what we have to look at. How do we create markets that are realistic? Markets that are realistic. If you have mining and forestry in a particular sub-region, and you have Amerindian communities that can do poultry to meet the requirements of those companies, how do we marry the two? But the first thing must be food security in the villages themselves. That is the first part of the plan. Now the police force. You can give any agency as much money, as much resources as possible. That alone would never bring results. Management, oversight, accountability, and importantly, a personal commitment. A personal commitment. And you know, when we talk about the police being corrupt and police officers taking bribe, what about a man who is giving the bribe? That person is not corrupt. We forget them from the equation. We forget them from the equation. That person is not corrupt. So how do we ensure the laws hold those persons accountable too, who are corrupting people? That is the other side of the equation. How do we hold those accountable too, who are corrupting the officials? Both sides of the equations we have to look at. And that has to come from a new oversight mechanism. Use of technology will become more and more related to the job of police officers. The Smart City program will come fully on stream very shortly. But you ever got a speeding ticket? You ever speed in your life? Driving? You never speed? All right. God be with you.
Thank you, sir. Village Voice? The Commission of Inquiry?
Well, this matter was investigated. There's a police file on this matter. The genesis of this is widely known. We have communicated with the family, and a certain course of action is being discussed.
Thank you, sir. Village Voice?
I said I'm not saying I'm not committing to that. Course of action is being discussed.
Thank you, sir. We'll take a question from Village Voice. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Lisa Hamilton, representing the Village Voice News. Mr. President, in your earlier remarks, you spoke about security.
Village Voice is online?
Online and in print.
And
in print, every Sunday.
Print. Okay. You must send me a copy.
No problem.
Okay.
Mr. President, in February, during your inaugural address to Parliament, you announced the government's decision to establish a border patrol unit via special legislation that would be drafted. Now, protection of the border is already enshrined in the GDF's mandate. Some persons have therefore questioned the reasoning behind this establishment of the said unit. Can you expound on the decision to cover this unit with further legislation? And also, who will staff this unit? Will this Border Patrol unit fall under the GDF? And is there a timeline that the government is working with? That's my first question. Secondly, the nurses of Linden have been striking for several weeks in relation to poor working conditions, and they felt disrespected by the CEO there. Why would you say there seems to be a reluctance on the government's part to meet with the nurses and address their concerns? Has the government had a chance to review their concerns? And Mr. President, can we have an update on the diplomatic postings? We know that we would have seen the High Commissioner to India being appointed, China, and I believe the US, but what about the key outstanding diplomatic postings? I believe outstanding are the UK and Canada. And finally, if I may just add one last question. For 2021, there was an expected rollout on the ban on single-use plastic products by the EPA. I spoke with the EPA and they said that the directive in that regard is within the office of the president. So I'm wondering if that is still on the agenda, given that the tourism industry cares a lot about that, as well as City Hall and other persons.
You said that there was not a willingness on the part of government to meet with the nurses. And you said that government did not review the concerns, an unwillingness to review the concerns of the nurses. Both are factually incorrect. Both are factually incorrect. Both the premise on your question are factually incorrect. Because if you even follow the news, you will see that both the Ministry of Labor and Ministry of Health were actively engaged on this matter. And there is a certain procedure that has to be followed at the Ministry of Labor. And working condition, we are trying to improve the condition of work all over the country. Linden is one of the hospitals that is up for improvement. But I don't know that this is the reason they're striking. That was not the impression I got, because nothing has changed 9 months ago to now in terms of the work condition. For a matter of fact, it got better because they have access to protective gear and everything now. So I don't know, now you're bringing information, new information to me. But if you can tell me what has changed in their work condition 9 months ago and now, then I'll be very happy. Because the only change that took place is a change for the better. So are they striking because the conditions became better? I don't think so. So again, we need to do a fact check on that. The Border Patrol unit, I haven't seen the type of questions you said are being asked about the unit itself. But supposingly those questions are asked, the responsibility legislatively, in terms of and constitutionally, in terms of our border and the protection of our border, lies with the Army, as you're aware. Nothing would change that. Nothing would change that. All over the world, you have Border Patrol units. Those units are community-based and would help in information gathering, intelligence gathering, day-to-day monitoring, and that information will be fed into the system that enhances our ability to proper police and protect our borders. And yes, the legislation that would make this distinction are currently under review by Cabinet, and then it will be sent to Parliament. And I think invariably I've answered the question as to where the personnel will come from, the communities themselves. Just now, yes. In terms of the ban on single-use plastic, there's a transition period. I think more and more now we are moving to the either reusable or environmentally friendly packages, but that transition is still taking place.
Thank you. Okay, so time is against us, but I'm going to allow your question, and then I'm going to allow your question, Mr. Rodriguez, and then we'll have to come to a close, Mr. President.
Abina Rockcliffe, Guyana Standard. Sir, I heard all you said based on the recording.
On what?
With the recording played, I
Yes.
understand the message being sent about engagements with the opposition, but I would like to know how you intend to work out or work around certain engagements that are enshrined in the Constitution, like for the appointment of a new police commissioner, etc. If I'm to turn my attention to GYEITI, the presence of that body is not felt in Guyana. Since you take over, I haven't seen any changes there. They still have the same chair and things are going on as normal. Do you have any intention on making GYEITI stronger for the benefit of Guyanese? And my final question has to do with Venezuela. A few weeks, months, probably a month and a half ago, when we saw the fighter jets, Guyanese were taken by surprise. But it should not have been that way, because about 2 to 3 weeks prior to that, Venezuela had on their accounts, their online forums, that they intend to up the pressure on Guyana. They appointed a special commission for defense of Guyana Essequibo territory, and decisions were made at the level of Parliament to do certain things, yet Guyanese were taken by surprise. Is there a decision made by your government not to inform Guyanese on what is going on so that they can be prepared and be on the lookout for certain occurrences?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Repensi. Respond, and then we'll
Guyana,
Abina,
sorry. Guyana. It is very unfortunate that you would say that we are not keeping Guyanese abreast. On every occasion that there was any activity in relation to the Venezuela issue, I addressed the nation. And I don't want to say much on this issue, because this is a sensitive issue that has to be managed in a particular way. And I think Guyanese understands that. And in understanding that, they know one thing for sure is that we are all on one on this issue. And whilst you may say Guyanese were surprised, I think many Guyanese were not surprised too. Many Guyanese were not surprised too. Because in my address to the nation, I pointed the very fact. Before that sighting took place, I pointed to that very fact of the threats that were made. We wrote to the United Nations Secretary General. We got CARICOM involvement. We got CARICOM to issue a statement. We got the UN to issue a statement. We got the OAS to issue a statement. So that is it on that issue. Why is it that I have to work around Mr. Harmon? I don't understand this. Why is it I have to work around Mr. Harmon? I played a tape of this man who has absolutely no respect for anyone, including the court, making damaging statements, and then I am called to ask why I don't work around him. Well, I don't know how I work. I don't know. First of all, our position in relation to Harmon is very clear. I played the tape. Instead of doing what is right, he has now gone totally outraged. Not only at the executive now, but at the judiciary also. Not only the executive now, at the judiciary also, but three separate arms of government. I can speak for the executive, and I've spoken for the executive. Yes, you can move on.
The EI.
I answered the EITI. What's that? Oh, okay. So, as you're aware, there are no commercial flights out of St. Vincent. We have been in constant contact with the Honorary Consul there. We've been providing support to the Guyanese community, and we have been receiving feedback. And every action in relation to the requests of those Guyanese will be facilitated as far as possible, once practical.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez.
Yes, well, I think I answered the question on EITI earlier. But strengthening of EITI, that is of course part of our manifesto promise. Yes, we have not moved on everything as yet in government. We have not moved on everything. It's only 9 months. There was a lot to be done. We had to get the country settled. We had to get programs up and running. But these things will come.
Thank you.
I can't say that now, but when we look at the improvement and what will be done, all those changes, if necessary, will be made.
Thank you. We must move on. We'll take Mr. Rodriguez's question.
Mr. President, a lot has been said about oil and what your administration is going to be doing, pipelines and otherwise. There's a lot has gone on in the world as it relates to oil's positives and negatives. And what is the real worry of the citizens of this country is what your administration, your government see as the main source of projected non-oil growth in the economy, and what specific actions are your government going to take to ensure that this expected growth is realized?
Well,
thank you, Mr.
I spent much of my presentation addressing this very issue, the issue of non-oil growth. I spoke about the agriculture sector, how we'll make the agriculture sector competitive, how we'll target the regional market, how we'll expand new opportunities. We spoke about reducing the cost of energy that would make us globally competitive in developing a strong industrial and manufacturing sector with value-added agro-industries being a major part of that. We spoke about the development and expansion of aquaculture. We spoke about the opening up of new lands through investment in new farm-to-market access roads for higher volume production, greater yield, and increased productivity. We spoke about ecotourism, investing in ecotourism, the new hotels that will come on stream, having an aggressive ecotourism marketing plan. We are, Prime Minister Motley and I have already spoken about twinning our tourism product. That is Barbados and Guyana. The ministers of tourism from the two countries are supposed to follow up on this to see how we come up with a joint marketing plan on twinning the two products. Because you know, a family traveling, the children may want some sand and sea, and another part of the family want ecotourism. So how can we effectively do this? So these are, and we also spoke about the services industry. We are ready to support new call centers in Region 10, 2, and 6 with the freeing up of the telecommunications sector, the liberalization. We are now seeing great investment in these regions, and our intention is to have the government provide the shell facilities and investors to come and make use of those shell facilities, which can create hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs in these regions, and adding to household income. Once household income is increased, the capacity to spend is improved, and the living standard of that family and community is enhanced.
Thank you, Mr. President. And on that note, I'd like to bring this press conference to a close. Thank you all for joining us today. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, thank you for coming, and we look forward to engaging you further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and please stay safe.